Today's episode is brought to you by Musical Surroundings. For over 30 years, Musical Surroundings has distributed high-performance analog playback equipment to vinyl enthusiasts and music lovers throughout the United States. Based in Oakland, California, Musical Surroundings represents world-class brands like Clear Audio, Hanna, DS Audio, and their own line of Musical Surroundings phono preamplifiers. To learn more about the exceptional turntables, cartridges, and analog accessories they offer, visit musicalsurroundings.com. That's musicalsurroundings.com. Today's episode is also sponsored by Shit Audio. Shit Audio designs and builds audio components in California and Texas. Based in Valencia and Corpus Christi, their wide line of amps, DACs, and audio accessories fit any budget, starting at $49. For a full rundown of all their products, visit shit.com or stop by their retail store in Old Newhall, just north of Los Angeles. That's SCHIIT.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by one of the originals in high-end audio, Purist Audio Designs. Purist Audio Design made the first fluid-shielded audio cable over 35 years ago and still makes them today right here in the U.S. For over 35 years, Purist Audio has connected you to the music. They passionately make high-end, high-crafted audio cables designed specifically to the needs of your system. They list their specs, such as resistance and shield quality, and you can find them at puristaudiodesing.com. Purist Audio Design is veteran-owned and available worldwide. Hey everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. Season 6, Episode 6, Wireless Audio Revisited. Today on the show, we have a couple of good friends from the company SVS, and this is the second time actually we've had someone from SVS on the show. The first one was Director of Technology Ed Mullen, who did a subwoofer setup, and I encourage you guys to check that one out. It was a very popular one, so we decided to have the guys back on the show. Smith and Nick, thank you so much for joining us. How you doing today?
Doing very well, Brian. Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, glad to be here.
So, on the subject of wireless audio, and we're going to take a pretty broad look at this for the beginners, but we're going to also dive in just a little bit deeper into kind of the techs and specs of this pretty broad topic, I think most would say. But a very important topic to audiophiles today, because this type of thing is continuing to grow on all fronts, really, with headphone technology, speaker technology, subwoofer technology. Everything is getting applied. Wireless is the future. As much as we audiophiles love wires, this is going to be part of the ecosystem moving forward, whether you want it to or not. So we're here to help educate and explain a little bit of it to you, because it can be complicated. There's a lot of elements to it. Today's show is also sponsored by Wharfedale. For nearly 90 years, Wharfedale has built loudspeakers for music lovers all over the world. With a warm and natural sound signature, their inherently high-fidelity sonic retrieval simply makes you want to listen to your music for longer. Visit wharfedaleusa.com to discover the high-value Diamond 12 series, the best-selling Linton Heritage, and the no-holds-barred Elysian. That's WHARFEDALEUSA.com. So just kind of to start us off, let's talk about what are the current options or applications in terms of hardware for wireless audio in a broad sense.
Well, I think the way I like to think about wireless audio, just quote-unquote wireless audio broadly, is that I kind of put it into two different camps. There's wireless audio when people are really talking about streaming music or streaming audio into their home, and that's where things like Sonos or DTS's Playfi can enable things like Spotify and Tidal, Amazon Music. There's that side of wireless audio. And then there's this other side of what people call wireless audio, which is more about utility. And this is wireless transmitters that are really about moving some audio from one place to another, maybe within your home. And this is where maybe a wireless transmitter is bringing the sound from your surround receiver processor in the front of your room to an amplified pair of speakers in the back for your surrounds. Like that, there's that aspect of utility. So those are kind of the two parts of wireless audio that I kind of break it down into.
Yeah, and I think when you talk about the hardware, Smith had talked about the transmitters, but you obviously have powered speakers now that can accept wireless signals. You have sound bars, you have headphones. I think the holy grail is to have surround speakers, like a full-on surround sound system where you can have it all pushed out wirelessly. So there's really sort of a burgeoning cottage of different industry or different products that are adapting this wireless technology, and they do it in different ways. And I hope today we'll be able to explain a little bit better what those different ways are and some of the emerging technologies that are coming out of this space, which are pretty exciting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to make things even more complicated, I think I was just scrolling through the newsfeed and I saw RHA, who makes in-ears, is making a Sonos in-ear, which my assumption, I didn't click on the article, of course, but my assumption is that this is going to be like a direct beam from a Sonos to a headphone, which is something even like another wrinkle that really hasn't been discussed before. So, but generally speaking, let's not get ahead of ourselves. People probably consider Bluetooth first when they're thinking about wireless audio. What kind of applications are Bluetooth currently used in, and what type of technology is used within that to help us better understand it?
I mean, first and foremost, probably everybody experiences Bluetooth in a lot of headphones. And Bluetooth wireless headphones have been on the market for years now and have really evolved a lot. But you also find Bluetooth in portable speakers, whether it's a small speaker that you carry around in your backpack and take it to class or whatever, or bring it to the beach. And then Bluetooth audio is also very common now in cars. It's common in sound bars, AV receivers, some powered speakers. And if you have legacy electronics, you can usually get some sort of Bluetooth dongle that will basically bring Bluetooth capability to older gear. Generally speaking, Bluetooth has evolved quite a bit over the last, I think, like more than a decade at this point. And the newer versions have certain codecs that are in them, something called like aptX HD, which basically try and improve the audio fidelity as much as possible for the limitations of Bluetooth. And then Bluetooth 5.0 is basically the newest hardware and protocol that's out there. And that's most common in true wireless stereo headphones. So that's where you see people have two independent headphones, one in each ear, and there's no wires between them, and there's no wires to whatever their music's coming from. That's usually a 5.0 version of the Bluetooth hardware. The one other thing I will say about Bluetooth, well, it basically is ubiquitous. It's in almost everything now. And it is hugely convenient and easy to use, easy to pair. That does come at the cost of usually range. So the distance that Bluetooth can transmit is smaller than some other wireless protocols. And the bandwidth is less. So when people talk about, oh, Bluetooth doesn't sound that good, this is usually the limiting factor in how good a Bluetooth system can sound. Bluetooth basically trades off bandwidth for reliable ease of connectivity. So that means it's literally sending less zeros and ones, which is less data, which equates to less resolution.
And I think it's important to understand that you can't make it sound better. Like, you can have the most expensive high fidelity system in the world. If you're streaming Bluetooth to it, there's just not much that you can do to improve the quality of that signal. So it's always going to sort of have that stopping point in terms of sound quality. And I think that's why some of these newer platforms that are emerging really are so important for folks who appreciate great audio.
Yeah, in a digital sense, the pipeline shrinks down as it kind of passes through that point. Are the specific codecs leashed directly to Bluetooth 5.0, or are they independent? Like, as Bluetooth 5.0 has come out, and we talked about that, is that a separate thing, or do the aptX HD come with that hand in hand?
aptX HD and some of the other codecs, they kind of overlap on top of it. So you could, in principle, have aptX HD in some older Bluetooth technology, like a 4.0, 4.2. You could also have a newer 5.0 Bluetooth chipset that doesn't pay and enable some of these extra features like aptX to kind of bump up the audio quality as much as possible. The main thing is, Bluetooth is really about ease of connectivity. I have friends who I've given really high quality playback systems to that have other ways of streaming audio to it, and they still default to Bluetooth because it's so easy for them, and that's what they're comfortable with. And I'm not going to fault those people for that because they're still consuming and enjoying audio. That's the way that they do it. But at the end of the day, what Nick was saying is totally true. If you're using Bluetooth as the way to send audio, that will most likely be the weakest link or one of the weakest links in the playback chain, and that's what's going to limit you. Another example for an audiophile type audience, it doesn't matter how good your speakers are and how great your amplifier is and all the things in your playback chain. If your room is terrible, the room is going to be the limiting factor. So in a Bluetooth playback chain, everything can be great, and if you're using Bluetooth, then that might be what limits it.
When we consider Bluetooth first, obviously, as the main one, that's not the only option.
Right.
There's a lot of options for non-Bluetooth wireless connectivity out there. How are they most often used, and what are they?
Outside of Bluetooth, probably what you're most likely to encounter then is a Wi-Fi based audio streaming, and that's where systems like Sonos and Bluesound, Hios, DTS Play-Fi, that's kind of where those protocols, those wireless systems live. And there, you're basically trading Bluetooth's benefits of fast, ubiquitous connectivity for something that's Wi-Fi based and usually more robust in that space, can have a wider range, and has a much bigger pipe, can carry a way more data. And in the case of DTS Play-Fi, it can even send high resolution, like real high res, to a zone wirelessly, and that's a prolific amount more data compared to what Bluetooth can handle.
I think two of the most talked about kind of parts of that is AirPlay and Chromecast. What are those two protocols, and what sets them apart?
Great question. So AirPlay and Chromecast are really a kind of a Wi-Fi attempt at the conveniences of Bluetooth. So AirPlay 2 is from Apple. Chromecast was developed by Google. Both of these are Wi-Fi based wireless systems, wireless protocols. And it used to be that you kind of had to vote with your mobile device, and your vote was going to get you whichever one you voted for. So if you voted for an iPhone, you got AirPlay. If you voted for an Android, you got Chromecast. Those lines are starting to blur a little bit, and this is all just a totally it's still really early days in a lot of ways for these different protocols and systems, and they're still growing. Apple AirPlay is in kind of a 2.0 version of it, and it's really grown a ton. AirPlay 2 is working almost as seamlessly as Bluetooth is now in some of those ecosystems. And so as a Wi-Fi based protocol, they can send way more data than Bluetooth. And with that means you can get higher fidelity because it's basically baked into the operating system of some of these devices, or baked into some new TVs, baked into some new electronics. It has that same ease of connectivity, that same speed of connectivity and convenience as Bluetooth, but with higher fidelity.
It's something I'd add on to that too, as far as how these various protocols operate is, some of them are hardware agnostic, specifically Chromecast. You mentioned it works with the Android network, but there's a lot of devices, even Apple devices, that are Chromecast enabled. Mm-hmm. And they allow you to stream wirelessly that way. You had mentioned Hios and Sonos and Bluesound. Those tend to be closed-off networks. They only work with specific brands of products that are manufactured by the makers of those technologies. But then you have things like Chromecast and DTS Play-Fi, which is what we use in our SVS Prime Wireless audio products, our sound base and our powered speakers. And that's hardware agnostic. So, anywhere from 30 to 40 different brands have adapted the DTS Play-Fi technology, and it allows allows you to create a multi-room system in your home that provides you the ability to integrate some of these different products from different brands. You're not closed off to the network just made by those manufacturers. So, that was one of the big reasons that we adopted DTS Play-Fi because of that. And then also, between these different providers, there's also differences in fidelity. Smith, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Chromecast has a slight edge in terms of the quality of the audio signals they're able to transmit wirelessly. It's something on the range of 24-bit 96 kilohertz, where I think AirPlay is 16-bit. But again, those are just sort of spitballing numbers, but it's worth doing your research. If you are completely focused on getting the best sound possible, there are some differences in terms of the quality of audio signal that these different networks can pass. Those are just other variables that might come into play when you're choosing which types of product you want for your wireless audio system.
And actually it gets even more complicated beyond that, because then it also depends on what you're streaming. So if you're streaming Spotify also has its own data limitations. And so that will likely not even tap out what some of these other protocols can do. Versus if you use Qobuz can actually push a fairly high resolution file. So then maybe, at the end of the day, it gets really complicated and confusing. And I like to talk to people first about just where do they get their content from? Where are they comfortable and happy getting their sound from? In the case of someone that's a Spotify user, Spotify innately supports almost all of these protocols built into it. Spotify has its own protocol called Spotify Connect. And so that becomes its own really convenient, really easy pathway to just consume your content and enjoy it. If you're just totally wrapped up in making sure that you want to listen to your high-res files you've got downloaded on your computer, okay, what flavor of computer do you have? Do you have a Mac? Do you have a PC? What's the easiest way for you to consume the content? And I think, to me, that's a more worldly and kind of human-facing way of trying to figure out which way you want to vote on these things. Because there's a ton of options.
And on top of that, we'd be remiss not to mention Vroon, which is like an audiophile favorite software package, which acts as kind of like a traffic cop, right?
Yep.
So it directs where things are coming and where they're going. It allows you to send out the music to multiple units that are connected either through USB or wireless, right, at the same time, which is pretty cool, especially for a reviewer like me that likes to switch simultaneously between DACs. That's huge. Yeah, so there's a lot of like layers that go on top of it. You have the protocol that goes from the point A to the point B, where it's coming, Spotify Connect, and then, of course, these type of traffic cop softwares that layer on top of that to help do it. But that being said, of course, Helios, Sonos, and Bluesound will all have their own apps to help control that as well. Mm-hmm. This is just a third-party thing that would lay on top of that. So a lot of options, a lot of ways to unwrap it. And Apple's trying to get in the game too. I mean, they started out with their AirPlay, but let's not forget they have their own streaming service now that works really well with their ecosystem and will go yin-yang all over the place. So within their products. I always kind of am amazed how well that they've integrated the software streaming service with their software and the way it works. It's like if you're sending something out, it works pretty well.
Yeah.
So you mentioned high-resolution wireless audio streaming. What are the specs relating to bitrate and KHZ mean? Small K, big H, small Z. Got to have that abbreviation right.
If people are curious, in a real quick primer on digital audio, when people are talking about bitrate and sample frequency, what you're talking about is how many zeros and ones you have to describe a moment that is in the recording, and then how many of those moments do you have per second. So CD quality is generally considered 16-bit, 44.1 kilohertz. That's a little K, big H. So 16-bit means you have 16 zeros and ones, and all the combinations of zeros and ones within that to describe each moment. And then the 44.1 kilohertz means you have 44.1 thousand moments in a second to then and each one of those gets populated with 16 zeros and ones. So high resolution basically means that you have either more zeros and ones in each moment, or you have more moments in each second than CD quality. One or the other or both will basically qualify as high resolution. You'll see something like 24-bit 192. That means you have 24 zeros and ones and all the combinations therein, and 192,000 moments per second that you're describing with all those zeros and ones. It's still digital. It's still zeros and ones. And if you zoom in as much as you can into a moment of time, you're still going to get a little step, a little ladder up and down from moment to moment. It's not analog.
Can I share an analogy that I heard? And maybe you can help make sense of this. It's a very simple way to think about, bit rate and kilohertz and the sample rate and all that. And basically, the two specs that we're talking about, one refers to the size of the pipeline. You think of a pipeline and how much water it can move at any given moment. And the other one, refers to the water, like how much water is actually moving through that pipeline. So you can have a massive pipeline with a little trickle of water, and then obviously you're not getting a huge amount of quote unquote information. Or you can have a very tiny pipeline that's only able to move a certain amount of water. And then obviously you're constrained in terms of how much information you can pass based on that. So with that said, does that analogy make any sense to you, Smith? Which one refers to which?
That's totally accurate, totally correct, and I still like my way better. No,
no, yours is more technically correct. Mine is for simple minds like my own, where I need to turn this into something that it's like visual in my head. That's not ones and zeros.
Yeah, no, that's totally right. You can think of it totally that way. Where if you have a really small pipe, you're only allowing a little bit of water to come through. So the size of your pipe is how many zeros and ones you get. And then I would say maybe the speed of the water is your sample rate. So if you got a lot of water that can go through that pipe, then you're actually seeing more of that water pass by over time.
And to further stretch this analyzation, if you imagine the water falling into a bucket, right? Mm-hmm. And you can imagine a small trickle or a really wide pipe with a lot of fast-moving water through it. That bucket, in essence, is the file size that you're ending up with, right? So if we're talking about both streaming and files that you download, when it comes to these high-resolution files, they can be exponentially enormous.
Yeah, they can get really, really big.
MP3 with both of this, it's a tiny trickle in a tiny pipe.
Right.
We're talking about like a tidal wave. When it's full res, we're talking about gigs of data.
Yeah, it can
gigs instead of megabytes.
Yeah, a single song could go very quickly from 1 megabyte per minute stereo to 100. And if you want to put a whole album onto something like that, or push a whole album that way, like it can be a ton of data. Totally.
I think another important point to know about the bit depth and the sampling rate is once that information's gone, once you compress that audio signal, you can't get it back. You can't really upsample and get that quality once it's taken out of the original recording. If you have downloaded a file and it's at this certain quality, it's never going to get better no matter what you do to it.
Yeah, and you basically see the same thing in TVs, right? So if you have an HD Blu-ray player plugged into a really old TV, that really old TV is just going to do the best it can do with what you're giving it. But if you go the other way around and you somehow connect your VCR to an 8K TV, the electronics can only do so much with what you give it. So it's going to use the DSP and the smarts of the electronics to try and extrapolate and figure out I think in between these 2 points was probably something like this. Bluetooth kind of does the same thing. Bluetooth is basically going to take whatever you give it and most likely bring it down in bit rate and sample rate to what it can send. Whatever's receiving on the other side, it doesn't matter how good it is. It's garbage in, garbage out. One of my favorite things about DTS Play-Fi, they have a critical listening mode. And critical listening mode is this really cool thing that's really only in Play-Fi, where if you have a really high resolution track from Qobuz, you can send full resolution, every bit of the zeros and ones, all of that resolution to one zone and preserve all of it. You don't have any downsampling, you don't have any loss. in the files. It all gets passed through in some way. I mean, we might talk about this more later, but I think we're going to see more of that kind of stuff in the future.
On top of all that, another thing that audiophiles throw around quite a bit. I know, stick with us, guys, if this seems like a lot, if you're new to it. But if you've been dealing with this for a while, I think a lot of guys understand what a DAC is, right? A digital to audio converter, along with other wireless audio products. What do you think people should know about DACs in reference to these type of wireless audio products?
A DAC really, a DAC, digital analog converter, is exactly what the name is. It takes in digital and it spits out analog. When we were talking about water through the pipe, and I'm talking about numbers of zeros and moments of time, this is all to get as much resolution and fidelity to an analog state. You know, a lot of people would say that vinyl is the holy grail, right? Because analog is an analog recording on vinyl. And if you can maintain that analog signal as analog all the way through your playback chain, all the way to your amplifier, and then to your speakers, like you're basically preserving that holy grail. Now, I love vinyl. I have a nice vinyl setup myself, but vinyl also has limitations. So none of the...
And let me just interject here. If you let me plug something. If you listen to the previous podcast, we talk about how records are made, and we have a mastering engineer, Dave McNair, on. He actually let us know that most vinyl is actually cut from a digital file. Today. Not always, but most.
Yeah, and you can totally get into the weeds just chasing those recordings that didn't get that extra layer of processing. So, and this is where other flavors of digital audio come into play, like DSD, right? This DSD was developed by Sony, and it totally takes the zeros and ones and sample rate thing in a different direction. So anyway,
right, because it only has one bit.
It's just up or down.
Yeah,
but you're going to do that at a way higher rate. So instead of it being 90,000 times a second, it's like 500,000 times a second, basically. So it's, but it's just, it's just a different way to skin the cat. Sure. But yeah, so a DAC, just to get back to it, the DAC is going to take the zeros and ones and then bring it all back into an analog state, into an analog voltage that can then go onto your amplifier and off to your speakers. The quality of a DAC can also be a limiting factor, right? So if you have super high resolution data coming into a DAC, but the DAC is not capable of supporting all that resolution, again, it's going to do the best that it can. And likely, this could be a place of downsampling. Or, if you have a really nice DAC, it'll do upsampling as best as it can, just like the TV's trying to do the best it can with whatever it's getting. So this is just a part of the playback chain in the digital world that has to be there. For a long time, there was kind of what I would call a DAC arms race. As higher quality and different flavors of digital audio were becoming more accessible, the manufacturers that make and design DACs were basically having to try and find ways to catch up. And so you had this weird period where it's like you get a product with a DAC, but the DAC would only support certain flavors up to a certain resolution, and then you had to pay more to get these other ones. And I would say that day is pretty much gone. Everything's evolved to a place where without spending a ton of money, you can get a really good sounding DAC that'll basically handle whatever you throw at it, more or less. In our Prime Wireless products, we put in a very high quality DAC that supports all the way up to 24-bit, 192 kilohertz. And so for basically everything you could throw at it, whether it's Bluetooth or within the Play-Fi system or Spotify Connect, it'll be able to take any one of those and make the full use of all the resolution that comes into it.
I think of all the things in audio, the evolution of the DAC has seen the most in the past 10, 20 years of anything. And to be completely honest, in the early days, cheap DACs, I think, caught a lot of slack for the guff that digital got. Mm-hmm. When we talk about the analog purists and the true to source, we're getting to the point now where I think that the line between those two is getting closer and closer, thankfully, because we all want the best quality out there. But I do agree that in the early days, there were some issues, especially when I talked to these manufacturers that make these DACs that were the very first ones. They had these external DACs because they blamed so much of the tech for the bad sound of digital in like the 80s, the DAC stage going out of the CD player. And be like, hey, you want to improve your sound? Try this external deal. And so it just has seen a lot of evolution. And the good news is for listeners is that we're getting to a place now where you can get so much more for so much less money.
Totally.
So
I absolutely agree.
Not as something to be scared of if you're coming over from vinyl. No need to be scared,
Yeah.
friends. There's plenty of fun stuff to be had now. What do you think people should look for when choosing wireless speakers or other like wireless audio products?
So I'll start this one. I mean, I think first you have to understand your priorities. And if, your number one priority is sound quality, I think it's a lot of what we've already been talking about in terms of the quality of the DAC. How high res of files can it handle? Like can it achieve that 24-bit 192 kilohertz, which is, ultra high resolution? If you're just looking for a Bluetooth speaker to bring to the beach, it's never going to be able to achieve that. So I think first understanding your priorities as far as what you want to use the product for is first and foremost. But then I think, there's so many sort of little other variables you can consider when looking at wireless audio products. I think one of them is simplicity. And I think this is a really important one for people coming into the space for the first time. I actually did some research, Brian. You'll be proud of me. I talked to my 17-year-old son, and I was like, dude, what's up? If you were going to buy a wireless speaker, what's the most important thing to you? And he's like, it's got to be easy to set up. It can't be this like multi-step process where there's this like janky login and I got to create an account and I got to do all this stuff. It's like, I got to be able to plug and play. So I think when you're talking about wireless audio, that's one of the most important thing for folks who might be just starting to get into high performance audio. And then it can have a world of features that obviously will take extra steps to set up, multi-room and all this good stuff. But, that first initial process, it's got to be like, I'm up and running in minutes and able to listen to my music. And then I can sort of learn the feature set as I go. I think the other really important one is control options. Does it have an app? Do you want a remote? Does it have a front panel sort of interface if you're doing near field listening at a PC or desktop? Things like that I think are really important too, because it speaks to the experience and how you want to actually use the product. And I know we may talk about trends, but I think voice control too. Talk about Chromecast and Apple. You got Siri, you got Voice Assistant, you got Amazon Alexa. Oh, she's probably listening now. You got all these things that you can use to really move music around your house or bring up playlists or do whatever you want. So I feel like those aspects of control and simplicity are critical, and they go beyond the sort of sound quality story that a lot of these wireless products speak to. So I think those are two additional areas that when you're looking at the multiverse of wireless audio gear out there, that you should really consider thinking about your own experience and how you're going to use the products.
Yeah, huge. Good points. A really bad app can sink an experience, but again, strides are being made in this area as well. Back in the day, they were archaic and they can fail, right? They can suffer from connectivity. But even in the case of AirPlay, where it used to be so dodgy, with things are starting to get smoothed out. So once again, don't be afraid. Things are much better than they were just 10 years ago, and we're all seeing a lot of strides. And you brought up a really good point with voice commands. If you really feel inconvenience, you want it to the max. You don't even have to get off the chair. You don't even have to pick up a tablet. It's very strenuous on your wrists, causes a lot of energy. You can just speak it to the air if you get those two products. It works with the Apple ones as well, Amazon, as you said. So we're really pushing convenience to
and I think
max.
we hit on it a little bit earlier, but also the closed versus open standards. Like if you are willing to embrace a single brand and you're going to buy all these products if you want a multi-room system or a whole home audio setup, then that's fine. But if you want a little bit more flexibility, versatility to be able to integrate some products in your home theater, maybe a different set of products in your bedroom, maybe another one, in the billiards room like Smith has, then you're going to want to do your research and figure out what suite of products or family is right for you.
It's a billiards parlor.
Yeah.
My
parlor. Right in guest house number 2,
yeah.
right? Guest house number 2.
By the third pool.
Yeah, that's next to the subwoofer suite.
Yeah. That is also very interesting you say that, because I have a friend who's so deep into Sonos. We talk about speakers. He loves sound. He started in Sonos. He expanded to Sonos. He's and at this point, he can't get out. he's too invested in it. And I was like, hey, man, what about even a separate pair of external speakers? And while they have amplifiers and all that, he's not even really in a place where he can start throwing in a bunch of really obscure stuff into the system because it's so locked in. So you're 100% right. Think about it before you get in, and you can always change. It'll just cost you more money. But, there is a scenario when you're like, man, I'm kind of invested in this particular ecosystem where there could be limited somehow in versatility in hindsight. So that's a really, really good point. We were talking about whole house wireless playback. What are some common types of interference that can disrupt wireless audio playback?
Well, my 6-year-old has a wireless drone that he controls with a little remote, and so that's a very obscure one, but it speaks to sort of the depth of where interference can come from. But Smith, I know you've dealt with this with wireless security systems, and there's even toasters that have a wireless connection to them. So it can really come from anywhere. It just depends on how dense your network is, but it can really come from any different source that you may not even think is putting out a wireless signal.
Yeah, I'm not the head of IT at SVS, but I do have to live in this network Wi-Fi world quite a bit. Usually what I tell people is you kind of have to look at your home and the space and where your internet kind of comes in and try and make objective, holistic decisions that are going to be best for your space. If you live in a tiny single-room apartment and you have your one smart TV and your phone and that's it, your network Wi-Fi demands are pretty small. And so probably any reasonable wireless router will get the job done, maybe even the one that comes from your internet service provider. If you live in Texas and you've got this palatial estate and you've got 500 network devices and there's all these things going on, they're all in use, and you got 10 kids that are all streaming 4K and playing video games, you probably have pretty high internet demands. And so your internet connection speed from your ISP is going to be important, but then also the type of wireless network that you build up. And this is where it used to be a lot of people would use these internet network repeaters so you could kind of spread your wireless signal throughout your house. And mesh networks have kind of taken over a lot. And actually, they're not perfect, but I'm running a mesh network in my house, and it's probably the best internet connection I've had for coverage. And so things that can get in the way, microwaves, cordless telephones, other types of wireless devices, transmitters, receivers, your toaster apparently.
I had a friend who they had one of those electric fences for their dog, and every time he would walk by the subwoofer, which was on a wireless connector, it would have like cutout issues.
Yeah.
So again, it's like you don't really know where it's going to come from, and some things cause interference, and other things also are wireless and they don't cause interference. But like Smith was saying, there are things you can do to mitigate, whether it's a mesh network or these blasters or IR repeaters that sort of make your signal quality more dense. It sort of depends on each individual situation and then the quality of your router and all of that sort of combined.
Right. Also, I mean, if your house is basically made of timber, if it's just normal building materials, most likely a few walls in the way won't really cause too much degradation to your wireless signal, but it could. Or if you live in a place that's a concrete bunker, or your walls are made of steel, that also will totally have an influence on your network connection speeds, which then gets in the way of all the wireless audio you're trying to stream and enjoy.
Yeah, and one of the biggest takeaways from this section I want to point out is if you live in a big home, do not use the router that comes with your cable provider. You need to upgrade the router, and you need to upgrade the wireless transmitter. It will work in a small situation, but if you got a big house and you're having some issues and you're just using the stuff they gave through you, the all-in-one deal, check that first. Upgrade that first. And let's be honest. Look, we were talking about the pipe earlier. We keep coming back to the pipeline.
Always back to the pipe.
I love that analogy.
4K streams that are out there are sucking up so much bandwidth. It's different than when it was smaller, and it's different than YouTube. It's just sucking up a lot. So you want to be conscious of that when how many people and looking at your system as a whole, and it's not too complicated. These things can be fixed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
that's a good point too. If you're using Tidal or Qobuz or Amazon Music HD, your demands are going to be higher than if you're streaming Pandora or some of these lower quality streaming services. So all of that factors in terms of your network stability and what the demands are, and what kind of hardware you should adapt in your home.
Talked about a couple of them already, but any additional tips, tricks, setup knowledge you have for looking at these type of wireless audio setups?
I mean, placement, that can always help, keeping it closer to the router. And usually people don't put their speakers close to the router to get the best signal strength. They have a place in mind where they want speakers. But I think that's where having these repeaters and these mesh networks really help, because it gives you that flexibility to put the speakers where you want them as opposed to where they're going to have the best signal quality. So I think there's certainly a benefit to that in terms of, getting the setup that you want in your own home.
Generally, and rarely is this not the case, but I would also make sure that all of your electronics are up to date. My wife was having a bunch of problems with Spotify on her phone, on electronics I was having no problems with, and it just turned out that she had auto updates disabled or whatever it was. And so she ran a couple of updates and then everything was fine. It's a small point, but it can actually have a real impact on just debugging what's going on in your house if something's not working right or not working well enough.
And this one might seem really obvious, but, make sure you talk to your internet provider and get the best quality service they have. Don't settle for their entry level. If you're going to be streaming these super high-res files in 4K, you shouldn't be using the entry-level service that your cable or internet provider offers. So make sure you upgrade that to its the best quality they have. And we all love dealing with cable companies, so do it once and forget about it.
And retire that 14.4 modem.
Love 14.4 modems. They used to make awesome sound. Does anybody still remember that? I don't know how many people even remember that now, but awesome. Great reference.
Tempting me to impersonate it, but I won't.
You can go listen to some dubstep. You can find it.
What are the different options in terms of controlling music playback from a phone or tablet? How do options like Spotify Connect exactly work in those scenarios?
So Spotify Connect, Spotify is one of the, I would probably say two or three biggest streaming services in the world at this point. And so they developed Spotify Connect, and electronics that have Wi-Fi audio in it can get Spotify Connect certified. And really what that means is that it takes a lot of the control, a lot of the extra steps out of the equation. So you download Spotify on your phone, you've got a Spotify connected certified device on your network. In the Spotify app, usually just a little speaker icon, it'll basically show you all of the output devices. It'll show you all the zones, all the products that you can just, right from the Spotify app, push that content directly to. And so that takes all of the control and rigmarole kind of out of the equation and just dumps it right all within the Spotify app. And that's super convenient. Sonos, just as an example, they have a closed ecosystem. So they built the whole ecosystem on their own. It's their own thing. And so once you're within the Sonos ecosystem, everything is built into that. Roon, which you mentioned earlier, Brian, is its own thing, and it's a service you basically pay for.
Yep.
And it becomes the policeman, the governor of those connected electronics, and gives you that interface for connection and control.
So SVS has been a major player in the subwoofer game for a long time. How does the use of wireless audio in a subwoofer offer any advantages?
So this gets back a little bit to kind of the beginning of this, and where I was talking about this other flavor of wireless audio, which is more of utility. In this case, wireless audio is really talking about getting sound from one piece of electronics to another piece of electronics to just eliminate a wire that might do it normally. In the case of a couple of wireless kits that we offer, there's a transmitter and a receiver. The transmitter connects to your source electronics, be it a Navy receiver. It connects to the subwoofer output. And then you have a receiver, which is another separate box, and that connects to the input on the subwoofer. And so that acts as its own little wireless ecosystem. It doesn't require a Wi-Fi network, doesn't require Bluetooth pairing. Ours are pre-paired in the box, and so it's plug and play, and it really is to just eliminate what would probably be a super inconvenient wire run from one piece of electronics to another.
Especially with subwoofers, you had Ed Mullen on, so you know how important placement of a subwoofer is. Not everyone wants to put it right in the front stage, next to the speakers where that wire can be hidden behind a console. It may be that, center of the room, middle wall is where it fits best, or behind a couch or wherever. So if placement is really important to you, then it allows you to take advantage of the performance benefits you get from putting it in the best place in the room while reducing that cable clutter that Smith was mentioning. And I think another product that warrants mentioning in this regard too, you had mentioned our SVS SoundPath wireless adapters, and they allow you to sort of broadcast a signal to a subwoofer, and it is full range, so it could actually do powered speakers. But then there's this other cottage of products like our Prime Wireless Soundbase, which is essentially an integrated amplifier that you can connect to a pair of passive speakers. So I had a friend who dug out these old Infinity speakers from his dad's attic, and he's like, I'm not putting them in a home theater. I'm not setting them up, with anything. I just want to be able to stream my music to them. By having something like the Soundbase, it allows you to have a 300-watt integrated amp, and then it has all the functionality we were talking about with Bluetooth, Wi-Fi streaming capabilities. And so now he's got this nice sort of vintage hi-fi system powered by a wireless streaming device, and it really allows you to get the most out of the speakers, but bring them sort of into the future of high fidelity by having this wireless streaming capability. So as much about reducing cable clutter and sort of providing yourself placement opportunities that you might not have otherwise, but also adding sort of that future-facing technology to maybe some vintage or older products that you didn't think you'd be able to do that with before.
Things are changing. Amazon actually makes one as well that I saw that they tried to push out there that was similar, but like we were talking about earlier, locked into their ecosystem. So you could only use it with the Amazon streaming service. So again, when you're talking about making choices, there are options, but you should consider if you want variety in the products you buy or not, or you want basically on the other side, the simplicity of an ecosystem. It'll be simpler to set up, maybe not to execute, but to set up probably. But in the end, you're going to be locked into it. So just something to think about as you're getting in. Now, here we are to my favorite part of the podcast. I want to ask you guys, what do you envision for the future of wireless audio? What's going to happen next?
Well, I'll take first stab at this, and it goes back to the question we were just talking about. One of the wireless adapters that SVS makes uses what's called tri-band technology. We were talking about interference before that, and basically what this allows you to do is choose the wireless signal that is the most stable in any given moment automatically, so you're not having those issues with interference, and you're not getting, your sound getting cut out because of various devices cycling on and off, or your dog walking by, or your kid flying his drone. Like, none of that becomes a concern anymore, because this tri-band technology is basically always monitoring for the best possible signal strength, and then automatically allowing you to transfer the signal and the audio through that bandwidth. So you're going to see that technology start to emerge in a number of different products, because again, I think one of the big issues people have with wireless is that it cuts out from time to time. And so anything you can do to mitigate that is going to be a huge positive. So I think that's one exciting thing to look for, at least in the near term.
Smith, what do you think?
Yeah, and I would say, on the service side, you're already seeing it. You're seeing more and more services bump up the resolution and fidelity of the content. So, it used to be that the only way you could get digital files out of the internet was a super low resolution MP3 that you'd steal off of Napster. And now it seems like a few times a year, you're seeing more and more services come out saying that they're going to support full CD resolution, or they're going to start supporting high resolution. Tidal supports MQA, if that's a flavor of audio that you're into. And so you're going to just see more and more of that, I think, especially as internet service providers are able to start providing greater bandwidth, and it becomes easier and more common for people to be able to make use of that greater bandwidth in their home. I think it's just going to open floodgates on bigger pipes with more rushing water through them.
I like that analogy.
Bring the metaphor back one more time.
There you go. And I think another part of this too, for your multi-channel fans out there, I actually saw a Dolby Atmos commercial with Justin Bieber on it while watching TV last night. But that takes me to my point of there's sort of been this holy grail of like, well, when can I get a 5.1 or a 7.1.2 with Dolby Atmos speakers that is just completely wireless? Like, I don't even have to plug the speakers in. And nobody wants to, hang speakers on their ceiling and put batteries in them and have to change the batteries out. So, I know there's technologies like WiSA which do allow you to have sort of this wireless surround sound system DTS Play-Fi also allows you to add rear surrounds to a soundbar to various systems, but all those speakers have to get power, so they have to be plugged in. So, is it truly wireless? To some extent, yes, but, not yet. I don't know. Maybe Smith knows about the future of wireless charging and battery technology. I mean, I know you can stick your phone on a little pod and it charges it, but that pod still needs to be plugged in. So I don't know what the future looks like as far as that goes, but I know that's something that is a great pursuit for a lot of brands, is bringing people a multi-channel surround sound system with all of the great effects and immersiveness you get from that, but with just the fewest amount of wires possible. So I know that's a big pursuit that a lot of companies are chasing.
Yeah, wireless power transmission. I mean, that if you mentioned that 50 years ago, it'd be like, oh, you're talking about the craziest sci-fi thing ever. It's been demonstrated they can do it in kind of closed, concentrated setup spaces for it. I mean, I think there's going to be major home infrastructure that will have to adapt to that. But is that going to be in our lifetime? I think that's totally a possibility. What better application for whole home wireless power transmission than multi-channel audio? Mm-hmm. Probably be more useful in like a hospital or something, but why not bring it into the living room?
Why save lives when you could listen to better quality audio, though? Seriously. The other thing that you brought up, Nick, I thought was really interesting is I totally agree. It would blow the doors open if we had these type of wireless power transmissions. Alternatively, if we got batteries to a place where the power supply was either a lot more or lasted immensely longer. Let's say we never get the power thing working in our lifetime, but what if batteries? There's a lot of money in making a battery work good right now, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And if
That's
they
Tesla.
could get, I mean, that to me almost. I just thought of this is like sounds almost more promising than the latter, where it's like, hey, if we could get batteries really cranking, you just stick it. The products come with a battery, and it's just you never change it out. It's like this is going to last for 30, 40 years. Mm-hmm. That would be completely revolutionary for all of these things, especially if the size and the weight wasn't so bad. Because I don't know if you guys own any of those like battery pack camping deals. They weigh so much. Just everything's so heavy right now. Yeah. But we're getting there, right? We're getting closer.
We are definitely,
especially with the cars. Maybe that whole thing will just usher it in a little bit faster.
That's exactly what we're totally watching. We really watched lithium battery technology hit new milestones because of mobile computers and because of cars. And so building out that efficiency, the efficiency to hold more charge in a smaller space, the efficiency to put smarts behind it so that you use that energy more efficiently and get it to last longer. And then also how many times can it recharge? Does it, have a memory? Can you get rid of that memory aspect of batteries so that you can keep getting more full charges over more of a lifespan? That is an industrial revolution we are all living in right now. I mean, in a lot of ways, that's very cool, and it'll absolutely trickle into audio more and more. I think you basically do see it, especially in headphones. If you have an older pair of Bluetooth Jaybirds or something like that, the battery, the standby life and the playtime life of those headphones is much shorter than what you can find now in some of the more modern battery-powered Bluetooth headphones.
Yeah, because if you ask me, even with the standard right now of true wireless, I feel like the evidence is in the fact that the cases still have batteries, right?
Right.
It's like, we are acknowledging the fact that we're still not to a place where I would consider it a perfect integration into lifestyle, right?
Yeah.
You 5 to 6 hours, that's where we're at. And it should be more like a couple of days, like your phone.
Yeah.
So we're getting there. And I think that's a really perfect example of where we are within that system right now.
Yeah.
So good call, yeah. Batteries and headphones, perfect example. Well, Nicholas Brown, Mr. Smith, Freeman from SVS, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been very enlightening and always a pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
Fun times. Appreciate it, Brian.
Watch out for that pipe.
The Occasional Podcast is a production of the Part-Time Audiophile Network, which includes parttimeaudiophile.com, The Occasional Magazine, the PTA newsletter, and audiohead.com. You can stay in touch with us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. The Occasional Podcast is produced and hosted by Brian Hunter. executive produced by Scott Hall at PTA Productions. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the Occasional Podcast on iTunes, Google, Spotify, or wherever your favorite podcasts are downloaded.